Good afternoon, dear friends, and welcome to the Grand Canyon Baha'i Conference. I have the privilege of introducing you to our very first presenter, Dr. Firaydoun Javaheri. Dr. Javaheri was born in Iran and holds a doctorate in agronomy. He spent much of his life in Africa, 2 years in Gambia and then 25 years in Zambia. During the 25 years, he served at one point as Chief Technical Advisor for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Dr. Javaheri has served various Baha'i institutions. In 2003, he was elected to serve on the Universal House of Justice, where he served until 2018 when he retired. We hope you enjoy this session, and we're grateful to Dr. Javaheri for his contribution to the conference. Thank you.
Beloved friends, the theme of your conference, the vision of a future society, translating ideals into action, is an inspiring one. It is my honor to share with you some thoughts on the subject of healing racial prejudice and achieving race unity. I cannot imagine any group of people in the world today more equipped to deliberate on such an important subject than those who are attracted to the vision of Baha'u'llah for humanity. Baha'u'llah has not only given the world a clear vision for the future based on the oneness of human race, but also has provided a secure path to achieve it. To ensure success, he has provided a system with all the instruments and provisions humanity requires to attain its destined outcome. Whether it is the spiritual energy needed to transform individuals and societies, or his teachings and principles that shape a distinct framework for action, or his covenant that stimulates and protects the process, or his administrative order which enables the members of the human race to work together in a spirit of cooperation and collaboration along this path, or whether it is his unparalleled provision for humanity to receive continuous divine guidance throughout his dispensation, all of which are facets of that divine system designed to enable ordinary people of the world, propelled by his love, to work together to achieve it. And Baha'u'llah has given an emphatic promise that ultimately humankind will succeed in building the kingdom of God on earth, bringing about the unification of the human race into one global family, thus making this world a mirror of heaven. I also cannot imagine addressing this subject with any group of Baha'is better positioned to carry forward this monumental enterprise than the Baha'i community of the United States, whom Abdul Baha loved so dearly that he bequeathed to them a unique and challenging task, took it upon himself to nurture their capacity to arise and fulfill their destiny, and whom he assured that finally the steadily mounting sun of his, Baha'u'llah's, revelation, shining in its meridian splendor, will enable this mighty tree of his faith to yield in the fullness of time and on your soil its golden fruit. So, dear friends, as the beloved guardian told the American believers, ours is then the duty and privilege to labor by day and by night, amidst the storm and stress of these troublous days, that we may quicken the zeal of our fellow men, rekindle their hopes, stimulate their interest, open their eyes to the true faith of God, and enlist their active support in the carrying out of our common task for the peace and regeneration of the world. Let me begin by saying that prejudice is any preconceived opinion or feeling, often unfavorable, formed without knowledge or understanding, that insists on proving or upholding an idea without giving attention to facts. Ignorance is at the foundation of prejudice. And because of the emotions often attached to prejudice, it can develop into animosity. Prejudice spreads through blind acceptance of biased notions and by thoughtless adherence to harmful social norms. It gradually influences human thought and public opinion, penetrates social structures, institutionalizes discrimination, and can ultimately shape individual and collective consciousness. Prejudice is often associated with protecting self-interests, whether social, economical, territorial, political, or religious, among others. History shows that generations of seemingly good-hearted individuals can be influenced into following social systems based on prejudice. People gradually become indifferent to discrimination, whether in the form of intolerance or bigotry, or given effect through subjugation. Indifference to such injustice is then used by the perpetrators of discrimination to further justify their actions. Discrimination renders cooperation among all impossible. The whole population is deprived of valuable contributions that a segment of society would otherwise make to the common good. And the whole society pays the cost of discrimination. Abdul Baha warns that the world of humanity cannot attain illumination except through the abandonment of prejudice. Racial prejudice occurs when an individual or group of people hold themselves to be superior to another group of people because they belong to a certain race or have a particular physical color. At the root of racial discrimination is the erroneous and unfounded belief that there are groups and subgroups of humanity that innately possess varying capacities, which in turn justify different forms of treatment towards these same groups. Racism, a repulsive notion, which presents a formidable obstacle for establishing a just society and constitutes a major barrier to the true progress of humankind, has, alas, persisted over centuries throughout the world. Even where discrimination may not be overt, integration among the races in most areas of public and private life is largely superficial, and discrimination is promoted in subtle ways. No wonder then that establishing the oneness of human race and eradicating racial discrimination from the surface of the earth once and for all became the focus of the divine mission for this age, the age of the collective maturity of humanity. This mission aims at fostering a global civilization based on the oneness of the human race, a civilization to meet both our spiritual and material needs. Two manifestations of God appeared to usher in this day of God. The Bab gave his life in this path, and Baha'u'llah suffered every ordeal and hardship to bring the knowledge of the oneness of mankind to peoples and to establish it on earth. As Abdul Baha explained, the knowledge of the oneness of mankind is the gift of God to this enlightened age. And Shoghi Effendi tells us that the principle of the oneness of mankind is the hallmark of his Baha'u'llah's revelation and the pivot of all his teachings. Uniting humanity in one global family is, in the words of the Universal House of Justice, the ultimate aim of Baha'u'llah's mission. So just as the animating energies of the springtime penetrates the core of all things and create conditions for a new life, the spiritual energies released by the Baha'i revelation influenced hearts and souls directly and indirectly, and revitalized and revolutionized human society, thus making social change possible. With the coming of Baha'u'llah, a new chapter began in the life of the human race, and peoples from all walks of life and from all racial and religious backgrounds were and continue to be inspired to serve the noble aim of bringing about the oneness of the human race and ultimately establishing universal peace. Evidence of the indirect influence of Baha'u'llah's revelation can be seen in the gradual diffusion of the spirit of world solidarity that is spontaneously spreading around the globe. Decades after Baha'u'llah called on the rulers and peoples of the world to accept the oneness of mankind, a process began that brought about a major shift in the consciousness of humanity, which made the world come to terms with the concept of oneness of humankind. New possibilities were born, and nations took an irreversible turn towards oneness and peace. This turn was significant enough that Shoghi Effendi referred to it as the essential prerequisite to world unification. It is this coming to terms with the oneness of mankind during the 20th century that made the 20th century, in the words of Abdul Baha, the century of light, the century of the oneness of the world of humanity, the century of justice. During the second half of the 20th century, many new possibilities flourished and major steps were taken on the path to racial oneness, whether through legislation or the promotion of appropriate social and economic approaches, or through education and other means. Progress has been made. The migration of large numbers of people who left their homelands and settled among populations different from themselves, including those forced to do so as refugees, provided opportunities for a large number of inhabitants of this planet to experience firsthand the essential oneness of humankind. Following the tragic and shocking murder of Mr. George Floyd, the unprecedented global outrage expressed by millions of people world over who were rejecting racial discrimination and demanding racial equality was a strong indication of humanity's strength at the grassroots to embrace the principle of its oneness and disapprove of any system that accommodated prejudice based on skin color. The peoples of the world have begun to see oneness as the basis for justice and as the key to progress. They are demanding the establishment of a process aimed at bringing about true racial equality. This solidarity, this desire, this energy, and this fervor, if directed constructively, hold great promise for the dawning of the day when the sun of racial equality will shine upon all. Unity in diversity will manifest its rejuvenating power, and racial discrimination will be a sad story of the past. However, history, as recently attested by the Universal House of Justice, shows that any significant progress towards racial equality has invariably been met by countervailing processes, overt or covert, that serve to undermine the advances achieved and to reconstitute the forces of oppression by other means. The reason for this should be clear, at least to the Baha'is. In our writings, racial discrimination is referred to as a disease, a blight that has contaminated the society, one of the most baneful and persistent evils, and a profound deviation from the standards of true morality. Racism, as the House of Justice writes, is not a matter in which any amount of institutional action, however appropriate, can alone produce the desired outcome. It is rather a matter in which success depends primarily and ultimately on the private and public attitude of individuals. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all, moral and spiritual. In this regard, some 90 years ago, Shoghi Effendi, the beloved guardian, wrote this emphatic statement to the Baha'is of North America. Nothing short of a power that is born of God can succeed in establishing the principle of the oneness of mankind as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah. In my personal understanding, for Baha'is, the implication of this statement is this: although the indirect influence of the revelation of Baha'u'llah on the world of humanity has resulted in notable achievements in addressing issues related to race, without the influence of the world order of Baha'u'llah, we will not succeed in eradicating racism once and for all. The reason is simple. The root cause of racism is spiritual. The nature of the remedy, if it is to be effective, must likewise be spiritual. In the words of Shoghi Effendi, the world order of Baha'u'llah is that healing agency, that cementing force, that through the sacrificial efforts of those directly influenced by his revelation, those who believe in Baha'u'llah as the divine physician, working in collaboration with those who are attracted to his vision, is ushering in the spiritual conquest and the complete redemption of mankind. It is this agency that, as promised by Abdul Baha, will leaven the human world, freeing humankind from hatred, oppression, and discrimination. Even though the community of the followers of Baha'u'llah is at this time small, and the direct and tangible benefits of its efforts may be inconsiderable for some, yet Shoghi Effendi assures us the potentialities with which it has been endowed and through which it is destined to generate the individual and rebuild a broken world are incalculable. The vision of Baha'u'llah is clear. Addressing humanity, he says, "Ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. All the nations, peoples, and tongues are the branches, leaves, blossoms, and fruits of this great tree of humanity." For those of us who are attracted to his vision, believe in the truth of his divine scheme, and are convinced of the efficacy of his system, it is both our spiritual privilege and obligation to exert every effort to contribute to the realization of that vision, the coming together of the entire human race as members of one global family. Our guide along this path is the counsels enshrined in the tablets of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, and in the letters and messages of Shoghi Effendi and the Universal House of Justice. Internalizing these teachings will assist us to understand better the distinctive nature of the Baha'i way of contributing to racial unity. In these connections, I would like to share with you, based on my personal understanding of the Baha'i teachings, 5 points related to our individual and collective efforts to realize the aim of racial unity. One is to understand the concept of the oneness of mankind at a profound level. 2, to be aware and protect ourselves against the subtle forms of racism in society. 3, to live an individual and collective life completely free from racism. 4, appreciate the complexity and challenges of establishing the oneness of humanity. And 5th, and the last, to consider the best way for us Baha'is to contribute individually and collectively to the eradication of racial discrimination. So first, it is the command of Baha'u'llah to individuals to ponder and understand the oneness of the human race at a profound spiritual level, so as to be able to demonstrate it in our private and public life. Addressing humankind in the hidden words, Baha'u'llah writes, "Know ye not why we created you all from the same dust? That no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how you were created." And this guidance follows. "Since we have created you all from one same substance, it is incumbent on you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land, that from your inmost being, by your deeds and action, the signs of oneness may be made manifest. The Bab, in almost identical words and tone, proclaims the same. Reflecting on this vision makes it clear that the oneness of the human race is a fundamental divine truth and not a man-made choice. God has created only one tree, the tree of humanity, and we are all the fruits of that single tree. That means that we are one indivisible people. We are not different races. We are the human race, a fact that science has finally come to prove and accept as a fundamental truth. Recognition of this biological and spiritual reality is the antidote to racism. Knowledge of this spiritual truth should inspire and enable each one of us to search our conscience in the privacy of our chambers, to endeavor to see to what depth and to what extent we have understood it. Are there any traces of racial prejudice, even unintentional, in our hearts? To what extent may our thoughts, habits, and assumptions be influenced by what is going on in the larger society, causing us to unintentionally manifest prejudice towards a certain race, signifying anyone as other and not perceiving that we are all the fruits of the same tree? Individuals may also reflect on other questions related to race, such as, am I adequately aware of the suffering of those who are subject to racism and the pain they suffer? Or owing to social privileges I enjoy, am I not even conscious of this? Am I sensitive enough to the feelings of those who experience racism? Or do I think that there is no racism in society simply because I don't see it? How do I respond in the face of the violence that springs from racial prejudice? Do I try to have a compassionate understanding of the fact that the anger and frustration of those who, in the face of grievous racist oppressions over the course of generations, may well be such that they see no other way of dealing with the injustice perpetrated against them other than by becoming aggressive? Do I harbor, even unwittingly, any subconscious sense of superiority? And if so, how do I plan to overcome such an attitude? Is it possible that I, again unconsciously, have a patronizing attitude towards the members of a certain race? And if so, how do I free myself from this? To what extent is the focus of my life on the essential identity of human beings, human soul, being the fruit of one tree, etc., as opposed to secondary identities, skin color, language, culture? Do I react to things with which I am unfamiliar, again unintentionally, and most likely under the influence of what's happening around me in society, in such a way as to give a feeling of otherness to others with whom I interact? Things such as hearing a name that I privately consider strange, an accent with which I am unfamiliar, or ways of addressing, eating, and other social characteristics that are new to me? Do I try enough as an individual to uphold and abide by the standards of the Baha'i faith in terms of racial equality, mindful of the assertion of the beloved guardian who emphasizes that To discriminate against any race is a flagrant violation of the spirit that animates the faith of Baha'u'llah. The consciousness of any division or cleavage in its ranks is alien to its very purpose, principles, and ideals. To what extent does my life manifest complete freedom from racial prejudice? And indeed, to what extent do I benefit from the richness of God's creation through my conscious association in various settings with peoples of different background and color, in a spirit of oneness, love, and fellowship? The second point is to be aware that there are perspectives, concepts, practices, criticism, and language in present-day society that may promote racial discrimination in subtle ways. And that notwithstanding our strong belief in the oneness of humanity, we as Baha'is are not immune from the influence of these negative forces of society. Otherwise, the darkness of an ever-prevalent and subtle racial prejudice will inevitably enter our midst. It is the responsibility of the individual, the Baha'i community, and the faith institutions to remain alert to this possibility and to take measures to protect us against them. In a letter written on his behalf to the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Atlanta, Shoghi Effendi cautions, we must constantly be on our guard, whether as individuals or as an assembly or community, lest through us these destructive negative forces enter into our midst. Love for each other, the deep sense that we are a new organism, the dawnbreakers of a new world order, must constantly animate our Baha'i lives, and we must pray to be protected from the contamination of society which is so diseased with prejudice. How attentive are we as individuals, communities, and institutions to the possible impact of such negative forces? What do we do to protect ourselves? How often do we pray for this protection? The third point concerns how alert we are to the sensitivity of the matter of race. A letter written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi to a believer in 1949 says this: "It is difficult for the friends to always remember that in matters where race enters, 100 times more consideration and wisdom in handling situations is necessary than when an issue is not complicated by this factor." In this respect, Shoghi Effendi's advice is clear. Freedom from racial prejudice in any of its forms should be consistently demonstrated in every phase of their activity and life, whether in the Baha'i community or outside it, in public or in private, formally as well as informally, individually as well as in their official capacity as organized groups, committees, and assemblies. It should be deliberately cultivated through the various and everyday opportunities, no matter how insignificant that present themselves, whether in their homes, their business offices, their schools and colleges, their social parties and recreation grounds, their Baha'i meetings, conferences, conventions, summer schools, and assemblies. All three protagonists of the divine plan should reflect and ask, to what extent am I, are we vigilant in this matter, and thus able to be promoters of racial oneness. The Guardian has urged the Friends in the United States to follow the example of the beloved Master to demonstrate racial unity at all times and under all circumstances in their private and public lives, and to promote this fundamental principle of the cause. Let them revive and perpetuate the memory of those unforgettable and historic episodes and occasions on which he, Abdu'l-Baha, so strikingly demonstrated his keen sense of justice, his spontaneous sympathy for the downtrodden, his ever-abiding sense of the oneness of the human race, his overflowing love for its members, and his displeasure with those who dared to flout his wishes, to deride his methods, to challenge his principles, and to nullify his acts. Accounts of Abdu'l-Baha's travels in the United States at a time when racial discrimination was even more prevalent and overt than today illustrates how he took every opportunity during his entire trip to promote the oneness of the races. During these travels, Abdu'l-Baha, on the one hand, was very alert not to allow the standards of society to affect his own loving way of association with everyone, including people of color, while on the other hand, he did not belittle the actions of people who did not understand the oneness of the human race. He spoke publicly about race unity and stressed its essentiality as the basis of a just society, and praised and encouraged those who in their actions upheld and promoted the harmony of races. He educated the believers through the example he set to have the courage, audacity, and integrity to observe the oneness of the human race under all conditions. He was not silent on the matter of racism. He spoke and acted not in accordance with the norms of the society, but rather was guided at all times by the divine light within him. We should recognize that it is one thing for a Baha'i to be subject to racial discrimination in the larger society, and quite another if racial interactions within the Baha'i community give cause for concern. The House of Justice assures us that it well appreciates that for a Baha'i, the injuries arising from one's interaction with a fellow believer can be especially painful. This is where it becomes a necessity for all of us to pay special attention to our responsibility of nurturing social harmony within our own communities. The beloved Guardian says that every Baha'i community around the world should feel it to be its first and inescapable obligation to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it. He further says it should be the duty of every Baha'i community so to arrange its affairs that in cases where individuals belonging to the diverse minority elements within it are already qualified and fulfill the necessary requirements, Baha'i representative institutions, be they assemblies, conventions, conferences, or committees may have represented on them as many of these diverse elements, racial or otherwise, as possible. In the words of the beloved guardian, if any discrimination is at all to be tolerated in a Baha'i community, it should be a discrimination not against, but rather in favor of the minority, be it racial or otherwise. The Baha'i community of the United States, a community deeply loved and admired by the Master, is destined to make a unique contribution to race unity in that country and in the world. It is Abdul-Baha himself who called on you to dedicate your lives to promoting the oneness of mankind, set you in the path of laboring to implement the divine strategy to achieve this sacred responsibility, and made the emphatic promise to you that love and unity will be fostered between you, thereby bringing about the oneness of mankind. For the accomplishment of unity between the colored and whites will be an assurance of the world peace. After the passing of Abdul-Baha, your community continued to receive specific divine guidance regarding this complex and paramount task. Among many of the counsels of the beloved guardian to you in this regard is his cautioning that the community cannot hope to either escape the trials within which this nation is confronted, nor claim to be wholly immune from the evils that stain its character. He emphasized that a tremendous effort is required by both races, referring to black and whites, if their outlook, their manners, and conduct are to reflect in this darkened age the spirit and teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah. And further, he says, let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Shouqi Effendi, confident of the dedication and abilities of the friends in North America, guided the communities of the greatest name in this land and worked with you in implementing different stages of the divine plan to achieve the task bequeathed to you by Abdul-Baha. The Universal House of Justice, following the same divine strategy, continues to guide the friends in the United States to have a deeper understanding of their circumstances and their tasks in this historic mission. Your National Spiritual Assembly works tirelessly to assist you not only to internalize this guidance, but also to increase your capacity to act, taking account of the prevalent conditions of society and in consonance with your larger mission of contributing to the unfoldment of the divine plan in this land and throughout the world. Your National Assembly is doing everything to support your efforts, knowing full well that success in the historic mission of establishing the oneness of human race requires a clear vision, adherence to divine guidance, the adoption of a posture of learning, sacrificial efforts, readiness to suffer in its path if necessary, mindful at all times of Abdul-Baha's guidance to the members of your distinguished community, that each one should endeavor to develop and assist the other towards mutual achievements. Abdul Baha once told a representative of a philanthropic society in Europe, "I know of your work. I know your desire is to serve mankind and to draw together humanity under the banner of oneness. But members of that society must be aware lest it becomes only a discussion." Communities throughout your vast country realize that the crucial need of the present day is to lay the foundations of a global society that will reflect the oneness of the human race. They know that creating such a universal culture of oneness requires a fundamental spiritual awareness of that reality. They are dedicated to this task and are engaged in a learning process aimed at how to do this with ever increasing efficiency. It is therefore pertinent for every Baha'i community to reflect on questions such as these. Is our community's atmosphere conducive to reassuring peoples of various racial background that they can freely offer their diverse views based on their own understanding of the Baha'i writings, and that such views will be welcomed and valued? Does the community have a constructive way to learn about concerns related to race issues? Or does it adopt the view that discussions of the challenges related to race are harmful to community unity? The fourth point has to do with having an appreciation of how complex and challenging it is to establish the oneness of humanity as the ruling principle of a global just society, and for Baha'i contributions to bear tangible results. There are several related issues, but I will mention only two of them today. One is to grasp the full implications of the oneness of mankind as outlined by Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi's words are emphatic. The principle of the oneness of mankind implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. Study of the letters of Shoghi Effendi in his book, The World Order of Baha'u'llah, will no doubt help to better understand some of these implications. The letters of the Universal House of Justice are another valuable source of inspiration and guidance on this subject. In one message, the House of Justice refers to appropriate legal measures that must be universally upheld if the problem of racial discrimination is to be overcome. In a recent communication, after highlighting the need for changes in the field of social and economic development, the House of Justice also emphasizes that above all, the changes needed for the establishment of this oneness are moral and spiritual in nature. As early as 1998, the House of Justice explained that the well-meaning endeavors and the piecemeal efforts of those outside of the Baha'i communities often suffer from a lack of appreciation the spiritual origin of the illness of racism, and therefore has little lasting success. The other issue is the connection between the growth of the faith and the ability of the Baha'is to contribute effectively and decisively to the eradication of racial discrimination. On this point, the Universal House of Justice wrote, the size and influence of the Baha'i community are, alas, too limited for it to have a determining impact on conditions which have, after all, been hundreds of years in the making, explaining that the necessary precondition to translation of our community's social vision into reality is a massive expansion in the number of committed, deepened believers who are well grounded in the essentials of the cause. As for an individual Baha'i eager to contribute to achieving race unity, the Universal House of Justice has offered this guidance. There can be no objection in principle for a Baha'i to participate in activities that advocate social change in ways that are in keeping with the Baha'i teachings. In Baha'i communities with limited resources, too much involvement in such efforts at an early stage may dissipate their energies and detract from the coherence of activities necessary for growth. Yet, in areas where the faith has sufficiently consolidated itself, it is natural to expect that Baha'is would engage in social action, initially by finding ways to apply the teachings to the problems afflicting their families, neighbors, and the community in which they live. And this brings us to the fifth and the last point I would like to make. The best way for us, Baha'is, to contribute individually and collectively to the eradication of racial discrimination. As Baha'is, we believe that lasting change should be the result of social transformation. Considering the overall aim of Baha'u'llah's revelation and the divine strategy, whatever we have accomplished thus far for the development of the cause of God has constituted our contributions to the divine plan for the establishment of the oneness of mankind on earth. In the heroic age, the cause of God was established in the East and in the West, and the Baha'is of North America received their divine mandate to promote the oneness of mankind. The first century of the formative age of the cause, which concludes in less than a year, has seen the establishment of the administrative order of Baha'u'llah in localities across the entire world, the formation of the Universal House of Justice, the agency designed by Baha'u'llah for mankind to receive continuous divine guidance on its path to oneness, and the beginning of a process of capacity building needed for humanity to work together to learn how to translate the divine teachings into reality, thereby bringing about that oneness. The American Baha'i community has played a critical role in implementing the divine strategy and notably in the establishment of the administrative order. It has a brilliant record in spreading the message of Baha'u'llah throughout the world, thus making the global Baha'i community truly representative of the diversity of the entire human race. The tablets of divine plan addressed to you and to your sister community in Canada, in the words of the Universal House of Justice, launched you on a worldwide enterprise which you and the generations to succeed you are called upon to continue during the vast period of time stretching throughout the formative age and into the golden age of the Baha'i dispensation. More recently, in its letter dated 26th of March 2016, addressed to the Baha'is of the United States and Canada, the House of Justice recounts the range of illustrious achievements made by you and your fellow believers in Canada during the past century in effecting the geographic spread of the cause of Baha'u'llah and helping to establish Baha'i communities in every corner of the planet. It expresses joy at the successful conclusion of that initial stage of your sacred work and explains that the tasks confronting you now, though not identical with those of an earlier age, are most pressing on the home front. It then makes this compelling statement. The movement of your clusters to the furthest frontiers of learning will usher in the time anticipated by Shoghi Effendi at the start of your collective exertions, when the communities you build will directly combat and eventually eradicate the forces of corruption, of moral laxity, and of ingrained prejudice, eating away at the vitals of society. The categorical promise of the Universal House of Justice to you, beloved friends, is that the communities you help build now throughout the current community building process will directly combat and eventually eradicate the ingrained prejudice that is eating away at the vitals of your society. Referring to this promise in its July message of this year to you, the House of Justice stated, "Every believer, as the promulgator of Baha'u'llah's central principle of the oneness of humanity, should deeply meditate upon it and weigh its demanding implications for the profound alternation of thought and action required at this time." It invites you in that same message to carefully examine within the context of the framework governing your activities the forces unfolding around you, so as to determine where your energies might reinforce the most promising initiatives, what you should avoid, and how you might lend a distinctive contribution to the transformations needed to eradicate racism. The House of Justice emphasizes that it is not possible for you to effect the transformation envisaged by Baha'u'llah merely by adopting the perspectives, practices, concepts, criticism, and language of contemporary society, highlighting that your approach instead will be distinguished by maintaining a humble posture of learning, weighing alternatives in the light of his teachings, consulting to harmonize different views and shape collective action, and marching forward with unbreakable unity in serried lines. Through such reflections and gaining more experience in the field, dear friends, you will come to see with more clarity, to use the words of House of Justice again, how the challenge of addressing racial prejudice is an integral part of three broad areas of activity in which the Baha'i world is currently engaged: expansion and consolidation, social action, and participation in the discourses of society. You will come to appreciate more deeply how effective an instrument the Institute process within the concept of community building enterprise can be for eradicating racial discrimination from the surface of the earth. Racism, in the words of the Universal House of Justice, cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and will not designate anyone as other. The framework of the current global plans offers a unique environment and opportunity to prepare ourselves for an ever-increasing contribution to racial oneness. Consider the current core activities of the current plan and how each one of them provides the appropriate settings to follow the advice of Abdul Baha to your community regarding fighting racial discriminations. If the root cause of racism is spiritual, and the nature of the remedy must be spiritually and materially coherent, who then should focus on addressing this root cause? Are not we as Baha'is the ones privileged to have a divinely inspired plan for addressing the root cause of this blight? Are we not the ones who believe that the only lasting solution for racism lies in acceptance of the remedies of the divine physician? Is it not then logical that we should focus on the vital work that is our privilege and responsibility to shoulder? Key work that no one else can do without recognizing Baha'u'llah as the manifestation of God for this age? The spread of COVID-19 has provided an opportunity for humankind to reflect on its collective life on this planet. Many have already come to appreciate the value of the prescriptions of the divine physician for the betterment of the society and have resolved to make provisions for a different way of life. But we know that humanity will need to be assisted to overcome the weaknesses that inevitably cause it to deviate from its own resolutions. The divine plan is designed to do that. Larger and larger participation in it will bring about the desired results. We should be mindful that the path of establishing racial oneness is a long and thorny road beset with pitfalls. But we are ready to march on with steadfastness, perseverance, and sacrifice, knowing that Abdul Baha made it clear that those who steadfastly strive to promote the oneness of humanity will endure hardship and injustice. Among the challenges we will inevitably face will be feelings of frustrations and impatience. Racism has been in the making for centuries, and its eradication, which depends on a fundamental change of attitude, is a slow process by nature. In the words of the Universal House of Justice to an individual friend, this frustration and impatience can be allayed only if you are convinced that adherence to the teachings of our faith, though only gradually taking effect at first, will ultimately bring about the change you wish for. And if from that conviction you will exercise patience as you continue in your own efforts to assist in remedying the situation. No doubt, the faith has made significant strides during the first 100 years of the formative age in building communities that exemplify the oneness of humankind, progress that has been praised by outside observers. But let us be under no illusions. Much remains to be done. Let us also have no doubt that equipped with the principles enshrined in the faith's teachings, and with experience gained through implementing the tasks set out for us all in the divine plan, alongside the determination born of our love for the blessed beauty, the sustaining confirmations of the Almighty will strengthen our efforts to reflect the oneness of humankind in our lives and enrich our cooperation with hundreds and thousands of like-minded souls. Thus will the oneness of human race ultimately and firmly be established in the United States and around the world, making the earth the mirror image of the kingdom of God. People of diverse racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds will indeed live together in harmony, like the fruits of one tree, the flowers of one garden. Let us all take abiding comfort in the Master's unerring assurance that racial prejudice will one day be eliminated from the face of the earth. Thank you, friends.